Hello and welcome to Byte My Pie. Listening to music has changed a great deal over the years to the point we can now share it all around the home, and that's precisely what we're going to do in this video. Join me as we use free and open source software including Linux, Docker and Airsonic to set up our very own music streaming server. Although some of the technology involved has a reputation for being difficult to wrap your head around, fear not, because I'll go step by step, simplifying the process so that anyone can follow along. And by the time we're done, you'll be listening to your favourite tunes on anything from a laptop to a smartphone. So if this sounds appealing to you, stick around. Okay, let's dive straight in and open a web browser on our computer, and we're going to search for SparkyLinux, all one word. It's this top entry here, sparkylinux.org. Click on the download tab and then scroll down, and we're going to grab the stable version. If we scroll down again, we're going to download the 64-bit ISO image from osdn by clicking the link here, and then save that to your downloads directory. That's going to take a few minutes, so I'll pause the video and come back when it's finished. Okay, now that that's downloaded, let's close that browser tab, and we're going to search for the next bit of software we need, which is called Etcher. It's this top one, Portainer Etcher, and if you click the drop down arrow on the download button, we just want Etcher for Windows Portable. And again, we can save that to the downloads directory, and when it's finished downloading you can close your browser. Right, let's open File Explorer and navigate to the downloads folder. You need to connect a USB stick to your computer of at least 2 GB in size, because we're going to use the Etcher software to create our SparkyLinux USB installation media. So after you've plugged in your USB stick, double click on Portainer Etcher Portable. Next we want to select Flash from File and browse to the downloads directory, select SparkyLinux and click Open. You can see it's automatically selected my Kingston USB stick. Be aware that this process will wipe any data that's on that thumb drive, and when you're happy to continue, click Flash. Then click Yes to proceed past the Windows nag screen. This will take a little while, so I'll pause the video once more and come back when it's complete. Once Etcher has flashed the operating system to the USB stick, we can close the program. You can also close File Explorer and eject the thumb drive from your computer. Okay, let's have a quick word about what sort of hardware to use for our music server. Ideally, I'd suggest a small low-powered unit with a reasonably large hard drive. Something like an Intel NUC or Gigabyte bricks would be ideal, but any x86 based computer will do. Okay, go ahead and plug your USB stick into the computer that you're going to use as your music server, and make sure that it's set to boot from USB. When it reaches this boot menu, if you're in the US you can leave it on the default option, but if not you can use the arrow keys to come down and press enter to select more languages. For me, I'm going to come right the way down to where it says UK English and select that. This is what's known as a live environment. You could try out the operating system before you actually install it to the computer's hard disk. I've chosen SparkyLinux, and in particular the LXQT edition, for a few reasons. Number one, it's a lightweight operating system, so the computer you put it on doesn't need to be very powerful in order to run it. Number two, it's based on Debian Stable Edition, which is a very solid operating system and extremely popular on servers. And number three, it's got a nice easy to use GUI or graphical user interface. Okay, let's get the operating system installed, and we can do that by double clicking the Sparky installer and then allowing it to execute. So make sure you've got the right language selected and click Next. Then check that your region and zone are accurate and again click Next. Here we make sure that we've got the right keyboard selected and then click Next again. If your computer's only got the one hard drive, it should be automatically detected. Otherwise, make sure you select the correct one that you want to install the operating system onto. Then we're going to select Erase Disk. Note that if there's any data currently on this computer's hard drive, this process will wipe it. We want to click the Swap drop-down arrow and choose Swap with Hibernate. This will help our server out, particularly if it hasn't got a lot of physical RAM. Speaking of RAM, I'd recommend 4 GB or more. Further down we've got the option to encrypt the system, but as it's only going to be a music server, I'm not going to bother with that. Leave the bootloader location on the master boot record for the hard disk, which in this case is dev.sda, and then we can click on Next. Okay, now we need to set up an account and name our server. So the first box is asking what is your name, so I'm going to put Byte my Pi. Next down we need to enter a name that we want to use to log in, so I'm going to go with Byte my Pi again, but this time all lowercase with no spaces. Then we need to name the computer, so I'm just going to call it Music Server, all one word. And then we need to create a password. Note it needs to be at least 8 characters long and should contain a mix of letters, numbers and punctuation. So enter that, and then tab across or click in the second box and enter it again. It's more secure to untick this box so that it doesn't log in automatically, and it's up to you, but I'm going to leave it ticked so that it uses the same password for the administrator account. When you're happy with what you've entered, click on Next. This screen allows us to double check some of the options that we've just entered. So we just need to click on Install. As it says on the screen, this process can take about 15 to 30 minutes, so I'll pause the video and come back when it's done. And there we have it. That actually didn't take quite as long as I expected. So we just need to tick the box to restart the system and click Done. Make sure that you've removed the USB stick from the computer so that it boots from the internal hard drive. When it gets to the login prompt, enter your username, which in my case is Byte my Pi. Pop in your password, and then you can click on Login. It then asks us if we want to upgrade the system and install any language packs that might be needed, so just click OK to do that. Because it's an admin task, we just need to type in our password and OK it. Then we can confirm that we want to upgrade the system now by clicking on OK. This may take a moment or two, so I'll pause the video while it updates. If you get this message about configuring the Grub bootloader, first press enter on your keyboard to select OK, and then we need to select the device to install Grub onto. So use the cursor keys if necessary to make sure that the selection is on the hard drive itself, in this case dev.sda, and not the partition dev.sda1. Then press the space bar to select it, the tab key to move down to OK, and enter to continue. And that's the SparkyLinux operating system now up to date, so we can click on OK. On this screen we just need to select our language from the drop down list. So if I scroll down, mine is English GB, and then I can click OK. And as it tells us, it's about to download and install the packages for that language, so I just need to click OK again to start. And there you have it. We're now ready to continue to the next phase of our setup. We're now going to install a platform known as Docker, which is designed for setting apps up inside containers. If that all sounds like gobbledygook, don't worry about it. It's just an easy way for us to get our Airsonic music server up and running. Okay, to install Docker, if we click on the menu at the bottom left of the screen, come up to System Tools, and then click on apt.us. We need to pop in our password and click OK. And this is SparkyLinux's package manager, which is yet another reason why I've chosen this operating system, because as you'll see, it makes installing Docker an absolute breeze. If we choose System, as you can see at the top, there's Docker. So all we need to do is double click on it, click on Install, and then in the window that opens, tap Y for yes on your keyboard and press enter. And easy as that, Docker's now installed, so click OK to close that, and then you can close the package manager. Now to make Docker usable we do need to carry out a few extra steps, but fret not, they're pretty straightforward. So if we go back to the menu and System Tools again, but this time click on Qterminal, then we need to enter the following command. So it's sudo space user mod space hyphen lowercase a capital G space docker space $user in capital letters and press enter. This will make the current user, in my case Byte my Pi, a member of the Docker group. Because we've used the sudo command, which means we want to run this as the root or admin user, we need to pop in our password and press enter. Okay, if we close the terminal window, and yes, we're sure we want to exit, we need to reboot the computer. So if we come back down to menu and go to leave, and under here you've got reboot. Obviously there's shutdown in there as well, but for now let's just click on reboot. And because computers always want to make sure, it's asking us, do you really want to restart the computer? So just click on yes. When you get back to the login screen, enter your username and your password and click login. Right, there's just a couple more commands we need to enter into the terminal, and then we can get back to our nice pretty GUI. So let's reopen the terminal again from Start, System Tools, Qterminal. Okay, so the first command is docker space volume space create space Portainer underscore data. Hopefully the command is fairly self-explanatory, but what this does is creates a volume within Docker called Portainer underscore data. Without getting too bogged down in the details, this is important for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to more easily access the data being used inside a container. And two, if anything was to happen to the container, we still have the data that's associated with it. So press enter to create that volume. And then the final command is quite a lengthy one, so I'll put it in the video description so that you can copy and paste it in. To do this, if you click on menu, go to internet and launch Firefox, then search for YouTube, click on that, then search for Byte my Pi and select that one. Obviously, as I'm still recording it, this video isn't in here yet, but when it is, click on the video and scroll down to the description underneath. Find the section entitled Docker command to install Portainer, and then click and drag your mouse over the text underneath to highlight it. Then right click and select copy. Now if you close the browser window and return to the terminal, then right click again and this time choose paste clipboard. Now as you can see, there's quite a lot going on in this command, but it's basically telling Docker to download and install a container named Portainer, which we'll be able to access through a web browser on port 9000. Docker is fundamentally a command line platform, but Portainer will allow us to administer it through a user-friendly web interface. So to get that installed, press enter. When the commands finish running, you can type exit and press enter to leave the terminal, and just click yes to confirm. Now if you give Portainer a minute to start running, and then if we click on the menu, go to internet and launch the Firefox web browser. This time we're going to enter the address 127.0.0.1:900 and press enter. As this is the first time accessing Portainer's web interface, we need to create a password. This needs to be at least 8 characters long, so leave the username as admin and then type in your password and confirm it, and then click create user. I don't want Firefox to save my password, so I'm going to click don't save. Since Docker is installed on this computer, all we need to do is select local and then click connect. Now we're connected, we just need to select our local Docker installation, and that's it. Portainer's ready to go. If we open up a new tab, we're going to go and search for the Airsonic software, and to do this we're going to look on the Docker hub. So if you type the address hub.docker.com into your address bar, let's get rid of the cookies notification, and we're going to search for Airsonic. With Docker you get different developers packaging up their version of software into a container, and this is the case with Airsonic as well. So if you scroll down the list you'll see multiple versions of the program. For this video we're going to use the Linux server's implementation of Airsonic, so click on that. If you're not familiar with Linux server's software, I highly recommend checking out their website at linuxserver.io. For our purposes we're going to scroll down this page until we get to the section entitled Docker Compose. Now again, without getting too bogged down in the details, Docker Compose is basically a tool that, through use of a script, allows us to automate the installation of software, in this case Airsonic, within the Docker platform. So all we need to do is highlight the text by clicking and dragging across it from the version line at the top to the unless stop line at the bottom, and then right clicking on it and selecting copy. Then we can close that tab, and then back in Portainer we want to click on stacks, and then we're going to add a stack. You want to give it a name, so I'm just going to call it Airsonic. And then if we scroll down a little bit and make sure that web editor is selected, and then right click in the web editor text box and choose paste. Right, if we run through this script, because there are a few changes we'll need to make to ensure that it runs correctly with our installation. It's going to pull in the Linux server Airsonic image and then make a container out of it called Airsonic. Now if you've been following along with this video, the user ID and the group ID should be fine left at 1000. But if you want to make sure, you can open up a terminal, the Q terminal, and then in here type ID and press enter, and you can see that the UID, user ID, is indeed 1000, and the GID or group ID is 1000 as well. So we can exit out of that. The time zone of Europe London is fine for me, but you may need to alter this to reflect your region. The next two lines are optional, and as I don't want them, I'm going to delete them. Okay, the volumes section is particularly important because, as I mentioned earlier, this is where your data is going to reside. So what you've got is two paths. On the left hand side of each colon you've got the path to the directory on the local host, in other words the SparkyLinux computer, whereas on the right hand side of the colon you've got the path to the directory within the container. Obviously the container itself is also located on our SparkyLinux computer, but by default data located inside a container isn't typically accessible from the host's file system. Volumes give us a way to access some of this data by linking certain directories together, in this case the config music, playlists and podcasts folders. For this to work we need to set up these local directories on this computer. So let's go to the menu, to accessories, and open the PCman FM Qt file manager. Despite its somewhat long-winded name, this is SparkyLinux's equivalent of Windows File Explorer. Let's move the file manager up by clicking and dragging its top bar so that we can see the volumes section of the script below it. So what I'm going to do is, inside my account's home directory, which is already selected, I'm going to right click and create a new folder, and I'm going to call that Airsonic and then click OK. And then if we double click on Airsonic to go inside the folder, I'm going to make some new directories to represent these folders here. So let's right click and create another new folder, and this time call it config and click OK, which is the first one there. Then we need to do the same thing again, and this time create a new folder called music. Then we're going to make the new folder called playlists. And lastly, I'm going to make one called podcasts. Now you could also make a folder called media, but that one is optional. Now that we have our directories, we need to make sure that the paths are correct underneath volumes. To do this, if we look in File Manager, you can see that all of my newly created folders are in /home, Byte, Airsonic. So I need to reflect that in here. Starting with the first one, if I delete the path2 part and then have /home/ the account name, in my case Byte my pi /Airsonic, and then you've still got the /config directory on the end. That's the first one done. Now, because each of these folders are in the Airsonic directory, we can select this text by clicking and dragging, and then right click and choose copy. Then if we delete everything before music on the next one and press Ctrl V on the keyboard to paste. On the next line, delete everything before playlists and then press Ctrl V on your keyboard again to paste. And then on the last one, delete everything before podcasts and paste again there. So as you can see, all paths go to the home Byte Airsonic directory and then take us to the config, music, playlists and podcasts folders in turn. And then those folders which we just created within the File Manager link to the respective config, music, playlists and podcasts directories within the Airsonic container. Because we're not using a media folder, let's delete that line. Next down we have ports. You can leave these as is. It simply maps port 4040 on our SparkyLinux machine with the same port inside the container. Devices is optional, so let's delete that entire section. And then lastly we have the restart procedure. Being set to unless stopped means that unless we manually stop the container, Airsonic will stop and start with the host. In other words, it will automatically run each time our SparkyLinux machine is started. Okay, with that all done, let's scroll down to the bottom. You want to leave access control enabled and set to administrators, and then you can click deploy the stack. This will take a little while, so I'll pause the video and come back when it's finished. And there you go, the stack is successfully deployed. While we're using Docker through the Portainer web interface to deploy Airsonic in order to set up our music server, you could use the same tools to install a whole raft of software. If you look in Portainer's left-hand menu, you can see it's got the stacks section, which now contains the Airsonic stack that we just created. There's nothing to stop you setting up multiple stacks on the same machine, but for the purposes of this video we only need the one. Let's take a quick look at what adding that stack has done. If we click on images and scroll down, you can see here at the bottom that we've got our Airsonic image that was pulled into Docker. And then if we click on containers, here we've got the Airsonic container that Docker created using the image. You can see that it's already running, but if we were to select it, at the top we've got these controls where we can stop, restart it and more. Okay, let's uncheck that. And if I just scroll across a little bit, remember that we set it up on port 4040, and we can click on this link to launch the Airsonic web interface. When you've just created a container, you may have to give it a moment to start, but the fact we've got a login prompt shows that the container is running successfully. Notice in the address bar we've got our port 4040. This is preceded by 0.0.0.0. Because we're on the computer that's running the Airsonic software, this basically means we don't need to know its IP address in order to access this web page. We could just as easily use what's known as the network adapter's loop back address, or in other words 127.0.0.1, as we did earlier when we first accessed Portainer, only in this case we'd obviously have to put :4040 for the port to access Airsonic, or we could even use the name localhost. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I'd inadvertently changed to this when accessing Portainer. This simply refers to the computer you're currently using. Again, we'd have to enter the port number 4040 for Airsonic. Be aware that any of these three methods will only work on the machine serving the web page, in this case our SparkyLinux computer. So with that said, let's go back to the Portainer tab and log out of there, and we can close that, and let's get logged in. As it tells us on the screen, we need to log in with the username and password lowercase admin. Then it advises that we change that password immediately. So let's enter admin and log in. I don't want Firefox to save the password. We've got a handy getting started page with numbered steps to get us up and running. Number 1 is to change the administrator password. You can also create new user accounts with different privileges. So let's click on this link to do that now. You can see that the selected user is admin and that account has permission to do everything. If we scroll down to the bottom, there's this box to change the password, and if we tick that, we can enter a new one here. So pop one in and confirm it. Then if we scroll down again, we can click save. Okay, that's the admin user account secured. Let's go back to the getting started page by selecting home. Next, we're going to set up our media folders. We'll do this before setting up a new user account so that we can give that new user access to them. So let's click on set up media folders to get started. As you can see, it's already set up the music folder for us. Let's add the playlists one next. So under add media folder, I'll give it the name playlists, and then the folder itself is in /lowercase playlists. When you've entered that, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can click save, and that just leaves our podcasts folder. So enter the name podcasts, and then enter the folder /podcasts as well. Then scroll to the bottom and click save once more. Okay, now if we return to users by clicking the menu entry at the top, we can create our new user. Make sure that new user is selected in the select user box. Then you can select what permissions you want that user to have. I'm just going to leave it on the default. If we scroll down, you need to choose which media folders the user has permission to access. So I'm going to let them access music, playlists and podcasts. Then you need to create a username. I'll just go with Byte. You also need to enter an email address, but this doesn't have to be a real one, so I'll just go with bytemypie@home.local. Then lastly, create a password and confirm it. And when you've done all that, you can click save. It's always a good idea to create at least one other user apart from the admin, as you don't want everyone using your music server to have full control over Airsonic. Right, we've got our media folders, we've got our users. Now let's see about getting some content. To do this, I've got a few MP3 tracks that I've put onto a USB stick that I'm now going to connect to the SparkyLinux computer. When the pop-up appears to say that it's detected the removable medium, in other words the USB stick, you can click OK to open it in File Manager. All I'm going to do is highlight them by single clicking one and pressing Ctrl A on the keyboard, and then by right clicking on any of them we can choose copy. Now if we navigate to our home directory, in my case Byte, and double click the Airsonic folder we created earlier, then you can go into the music folder. Now we could just paste them in here, but it's better to keep things organised. So instead I'm going to right click and create a new folder. It would be a good idea to give this the name of the artist or album, but as I got these tracks off YouTube Audio, I'm just going to call it YouTube and click OK. And then if I go inside the new folder and right click, I can paste. Now that I've put my music into the music media folder, I can close the file manager. If you've got any of those old shiny things we used to call CDs lying around, you could rip them into the MP3 format and load them into your new music server. And if you're not sure how to do this, as luck would have it, I've got a video on that very topic. You can find a link in the description below. Note that although I've stuck with the ubiquitous MP3, Airsonic does support other formats as well. Okay, so now that we've added some tunes, you may be wondering why they're not showing up. To fix that, all we need to do is come over to this sidebar and click refresh. And as if by magic, there we have it, my YouTube folder. And if I click on that, we can see the tracks inside. As you add more music to the Airsonic server, it will be listed alphabetically down here on the left. When it comes to playing your songs, you can play all, you can play random, you can even download them, which could be handy if you're accessing your Airsonic server from a mobile device. To play a single track, you just need to click the play button next to it, and then you have these controls at the bottom where, amongst other things, you can pause it. Or if you select multiple tracks, you can do things in bulk. Playlists can be invaluable when it comes to listening to your music. So let's look at how we create one of those. To get started, click on Create New Playlist. By default it gives us today's date and time. Click on that, and then we can change its name by clicking Edit. Give it a new name in here, so I'll just call it Great Songs. You can add a comment if you want. You can tick this box if you want to make your playlist visible to other users, and then click Save to make the changes. So we've now got our playlist, but as you can see in brackets at the moment there's no music in it. If I click back on my YouTube music folder, let's say I really like the first and the third tracks. If I tick those and then click the drop down box here, I can add them to the playlist. Then I just need to select the playlist I want to add them to, which in my case is very easy because I've only got one at the moment. So select that. And if I click on Great Songs now, you can see I've got those two tracks within it. If at some point I wanted to remove a playlist, I'd just make sure that I can see the right hand side of the screen, and here you've got the option to delete it. Along the top bar we've got quick access to the main sections, so we've already seen Home with the Getting Started page. There's a link to a first start guide here if you want to check out things in more detail. When you finish with the Getting Started page, you can click this link to hide it. If you wanted to view it again, you can turn it back on in Settings in the General section. Let's click OK to reveal Airsonic's true home page. So now when you select Home, you get quick access to your content. If you wanted to, you can personalise this welcome message, or to give yourself a bit more room, you can remove it entirely. So let's do that by clicking on Settings, the General tab, scrolling down, and then deleting the content in the welcome message box. Then if we click Save and return to Home, the message should be gone. Next on the top menu, obviously clicking the playing icon takes us back to the media player section. If I was to favourite or star some tracks, then if I click on the starred section, they'll appear in here. If you like creating playlists, as your music collection grows, you can check them out in here. Next along we have podcasts. You can see that at the moment I haven't subscribed to any podcasts yet, so let's remedy that now. To do this we need to grab the address of the podcast we want to subscribe to. So let's open a new tab, and I'm going to search for the technology website, Twit. And look at that, the top entry says podcasts at Twit TV, although to be fair it is an ad. So let's click on that, and I'm going to grab the This Week in Tech podcast, and for it to work in Airsonic we want the subscribe via RSS link. Don't worry about all the XML content, all we need to do is highlight the address and then copy it. Once you've got the address for your podcast feed, you can close any tabs to get back to Airsonic. And if we delete the HTTP header from the box and then right click and paste in our new link, Then all that's left to do is click OK. When you've got your new podcast, you can click on it to see what's in there, and all being well, you should be looking at some episodes. If you can't see what you're after in the list, you can click the link to check for new episodes, and then if you check the boxes of the ones that you want and scroll to the bottom, you can click on download selected. If they don't show up, just click refresh page, and then once the play button appears, you can obviously click that to listen to it.
It's time for Twit This Week in Tech. What a panel we have.
And as you can see, the controls are the same as for when we're listening to music. Naturally, once you've finished listening to something, if you no longer want it, you can select the box and delete. And you also have the option at the top to delete the entire podcast. Next along, we've got settings. We've seen some of these before, so the media folders where we set those up earlier. In the general tab, we've got things like the file types that Airsonic can handle. You can also set the default language in here, as well as change the theme if you don't like the appearance. Further down is where we came before to remove the welcome message. On the next tab, we've got advanced. I'd leave things alone in that one. Next up is personal. As the name suggests, you can customize things to suit your preferences in here. At the bottom, you can even choose a little image to go with your account. And if you don't like any of those, you could upload your own. Then back in the menu, we've got users. Hopefully you remember this one from earlier. Then we have players, where you can choose the type of player you want to listen to your music and podcasts in. Personally, I'd leave this on web player, as I'll be showing you how to access Airsonic through an app on your mobile device later anyway. Next in the settings, we have DLNA/UPnP. Basically, if you know what these are, you'll also know whether you want them or not. If you don't, I wouldn't worry about it, just leave it disabled. Then we have the Sonos tab. Again, you'll know whether this is going to be useful to you or not. Transcoding is an interesting one. What this basically does is takes an existing media file and then on the fly converts it to a different format so that it can be more accessible to other devices. Unless you really know what you're doing, I'd leave this one alone. On the next tab, we've got Internet, TV and Radio. By the way, you may have noticed that my podcast has now showed up in the menu on the left. We can filter this list to show just music, playlists or podcasts, or leave it on the default all folders. Okay, let's add an internet radio station. To do this, we need to search for a stream URL. So if you open up a new tab in the browser and search for internet radio URLs, I'm going to scroll down and go with the radiofeeds.co.uk website because that's good for UK radio stations. You can see that there's a pretty extensive list available, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to go with a bit of classic rock. Clicking the main link would take you to the radio station's website. So what we want to do instead is click the abbreviated link to the right. You can listen using either the AAC Plus format or the MP3 one. AAC is said to generally provide a better listening experience than MP3, but that said, I'd go for the one that has the highest bitrate available, which in this case just so happens to be the AAC Plus format at 128 kilobits stereo. To get the URL, we need to right click on that and choose Copy Link Location. Now if we close the open tabs and go back to Airsonic, you want to right click in the stream URL box and then choose Paste. You can give it any name you want, but I'm going to stick with the name of the radio station, which was Absolute Classic Rock, and then click Save to add it. So as you can see now, we've now got this Internet, TV and Radio section with our Absolute Classic Rock radio station. And to listen to it, we can click the play button. As usual, we can use the buttons at the bottom of the screen to control it. And that's how you add an internet radio station through Airsonic. Then last up in the settings menu, we've got podcast. In here you can check the defaults as to what Airsonic does with your podcasts. If we return to the top bar, after settings we've got status. If you had multiple users set up, this gives you a nice visual indication of how much data each of them's using on your music server. Next along we've got more. A couple of useful sections in here. We've got Airsonic apps, and if you click on this link here, it shows you a list of some of the available apps across multiple platforms that should be able to stream content from your Airsonic server. As I mentioned earlier, we'll take a look at an app in a little bit to see how we can access Airsonic from a mobile device. If we close that tab and scroll down, the other useful section under More is the keyboard shortcuts. Next on the top menu we've got About. Besides giving us some extra information about the version of Airsonic that we're running and the license details, there's also a link to the Airsonic homepage, a link to the forum, and some contact information. Then lower down we have some log details. On the right hand side of the top bar we've got a search box. We've then got a link to our admin account, and next to that, Logout. Just before we leave the admin interface, I'd like to show you a quick bit of troubleshooting. If we return to settings, this is two things you can try if you ever add or remove content on your music server and Airsonic doesn't reflect the changes. They're both located within the media folders tab, and if you scroll down, the first one is this scan media folders now. As you can see, by default Airsonic will scan these every day at 3 o'clock in the morning, but to force it to update them right away you can simply click on the Scan Media Folders Now link. The second potential fix is what you can try if the first one didn't work. So if you scroll down to the bottom of Media Folders again, we have a link to clean up the database. If you run this, it could be worth scanning the media folders again afterwards. Right, if we log out of the admin account, we'll take a look at what using Airsonic looks like to the standard listener. However, before we do that, there's one last thing we need to do. So far we've been accessing Airsonic on the SparkyLinux computer it's installed on, but to use it throughout our home network we're going to need to know the IP address of the music server. Now we could just open up our Q terminal that we've used before and type in IP space A and press enter, and if we look for ETH0, which is the wired network adapter, you can see that the router has given it an IP address of 192.168.0.73. Now that's all well and good, but the trouble is at the moment that's what's called a dynamic IP address. In other words, it could change, and if that was to happen, none of the other devices on our network would be able to communicate with it anymore, which isn't much good for a server, even a music one. So to stop that from happening, we're going to set the IP address within the router so that it can't change. And to do that we obviously need to know the IP address of our router in order to access it. And once more the Linux terminal comes to the rescue, because we can enter the following command to find out what that is. And the command is IP space root space pipe space grep space default, and press enter. So in my case the router is on 192.168.0.1. So make a note of your router's IP address and then close the terminal. Then open a new tab in your web browser and in the address bar pop in that IP address and press enter. Next we need to log in. If you're not sure what your username and password are for the router, you can usually find them on the back of it. So pop your credentials in here and sign in. Depending on your router's manufacturer, your interface will probably look different to mine. What you're looking for in the menu is your router's DHCP leases. It may be worded differently, but it will usually contain the letters DHCP. In pfSense it's located in the status drop-down. You can see at the moment I've got 3 devices connected to the router. I can see clearly here that this one is my music server, but if that wasn't the case we could also compare the IP address with what we found earlier in SparkyLinux's terminal. When you've found the right device, you're looking for a way to set it so that the IP address doesn't change. In here I've got this plus button under Actions that says Add Static Mapping. Now again, the wording could be different on yours. It might be something like Reserve IP Address. So I'm going to click the plus. What this process will do is map the music server's MAC address so that moving forwards the IP address doesn't change. I'm actually going to give it a new static address, and I'm going to go with 192.168.0.200. Now again, this part depends on the router you're using. If you're happy to keep the IP address that was allocated, you may simply just be able to reserve it. If you want to use a more memorable IP address, like I've done, you may need to check the specifics of your router. In pfSense, for example, when you set your own static entry, it has to be an address from outside of the DHCP pool. As you can see on the screen, the DHCP pool is simply a range of IP addresses that the router can hand out to connecting clients. If you're not quite sure what to do, I'd recommend a quick Google search, typing in something like setting a static IP on a blank router, obviously filling in the model of your router in the blank. So I'm going to save those changes and apply them. When you're happy that you've done the same, you can log out of your router, and I'd recommend at this point, if we close our web browser, that we reboot our SparkyLinux music server. Okay, let's log back in, and if we open the terminal, we can do another IP space A and press enter, and just double check that we've now got the IP address we're expecting. And sure enough, my music server is now on 192.168.0.200. So make a note of yours, because you're going to need it to connect across the network, and then you can close the terminal. Just make sure that you leave the SparkyLinux computer turned on, as it obviously needs to be running to serve our music content, but you can turn off the monitor as we've now finished using it. So here I am back on my Windows PC. This could equally be a laptop or a Mac or even another Linux computer. Basically any device with a web browser, because we're going to open one now. And I'm going to type in the IP address of my music server, so 192.168.0.200, and if you remember, Airsonic is running on port 4040, and then press enter. This is precisely what we want to see, because it now means we're accessing our music server across our local home network. Now I could log in as admin, but because I want to experience this as a listener, I'm going to log into the Byte MyPy account that I created. So if you're following along, enter your Airsonic user account name here, and then pop in the password, and then we can log in. I don't want Chrome to save my password. Now the interface looks pretty similar to when we were logged directly into the Airsonic server as admin, and indeed we still have access to all of our content. It's not really noticeable at the moment, but as you add more media to your music server, these letters across the top will become more useful, because clicking on one will take you directly to the content that starts with that letter. We can dive into anything that we like the look of, and click on play to listen to a title. Let's click on the home button to take us back to the main screen. Along with the music player buttons at the bottom of the screen, we've got this More Actions list. The options here allow us to make changes to our play queue. If we take a quick peek in settings, you can see that since we're not logged in as admin, we have far less control over what we can change, which is just as it should be. And that's what the Airsonic web interface looks like when using it as a media player. Right, now that we know how to access our Airsonic server from a desktop PC or laptop, let's look at connecting to it from an Android device. And to do this, we're going to use an app called Substreamer. So let's open the Google Play Store and search for Substreamer. It's this one we want, Substreamer Subsonic Client. So let's install that. Okay, let's come out of the Play Store. As you can see, I've now got a shortcut on my home screen. If you can't see it, you might need to look in your app drawer. Let's launch Substreamer. The first thing we need to do is enter our credentials to connect to the Airsonic server. So in my case, the address is http://192.168.0.200:4040. Obviously enter the correct details for your Airsonic server here. Next we need to enter the username that we want to connect as. I'm going to use the Byte my Pi account that I set up in Airsonic. Then we need to enter the password for that account. And now we can log in. The app needs to perform a one-time optimization to grab any available cover art for our library. So let's run that now. Now that we're connected, let's go back out of settings. At the top left we've got this hamburger menu. As you can see, you can get to all of the main areas from here. If we look in folders, you can see the podcast and music that are set up on the server. So let's go play some tunes. Scrolling down shows us the 5 YouTube tracks that I copied into Airsonic earlier, and I can simply select one to play it. Selecting the loaded track at the bottom takes us into the apps player. You've got a timeline along with the usual media player controls. You can star a track if you like it, or select the 3 little dots to look at other options such as creating playlists. While the player view focuses on the currently selected track, selecting the icon at the top right will reveal all of the tracks within that folder, and from here we can easily move between them. Naturally, you can also change tracks from here. The little down arrow at the top left will take you out of the track and back to the folder, and then the back arrow will return you to the overview of all the folders. And that's a quick look at using the Substreamer app to access the content on your Airsonic music server. If you're using a mobile device with a more fruity flavour, you could check out the iSub Music Streamer app available in Apple's App Store. Lastly, if you haven't explored it already, you can find more information about the project on its website at airsonic.github.io. And that brings us to the end of this video. Whether you're into rock and pop, something more weighty like heavy metal, perhaps you favour the classics, or prefer some thigh-slapping country and western. Whatever your musical preferences, I hope you can see the advantages of running your very own music server. And hopefully the free and open source Airsonic will strike the right note with you. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified when I post the next one, just click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.